Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. I am Sandy Schoelles with my partner Jennifer Hynes and our team member Nicholas Humphrey, meteorologist and soon to be Dr. Nicholas Humphrey. Welcome.
Good
Hi.
to see you.
Yeah, it is a little bit
Yeah.
different on Friday night. Guys, I do have to start with something that I don't normally do, but I have a t-shirt on that says the letter hack. Okay. The letter hack is a small channel on YouTube. He's a new channel. And I wanted to wear the t-shirt because I enjoy him. It's a very tiny new channel. And what the letter hack does, he's a comic. And he everybody he interviews hi, letter hack. Everybody he interviews, he draws. He draws. And his artwork is amazing. And when he does his shows, they are so comforting. They're not like my shows. They're not like, they're not horribly stressful. It's a difference. So I just wanted to give him a shout out. Plus, he's sending me one of the sketchbooks. So for wearing the shirt, no, for winning it. So the letter hack. So let's hear it for the letter hack. Okay. So now that I've done that, Matt, welcome to the chat. I hope you learned something. Let's take it away. Jennifer, Nick.
It's great to see you, Nick. It's been a long time, actually, and I'm so excited to talk to you and find out what you've been up to. I know you've been pursuing your PhD in Fargo, North Dakota. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. North Dakota State University.
Oh,
Yeah. It's
there you
a
go.
emergency management and disaster science program. So yeah, I just
Mhm.
finished my second year of my PhD, and I'm going into my third and final year. And
Oh, that's great. Good for you.
yeah, yeah. And right now, I've completed coursework for the program, so I'm done with all my classes. And so now I'm working on comprehensive examinations. I have to do two of them, or I have to do like a bunch of writing for both of them, and then defend my answers before my faculty and then in the department. And then after, if I'm successful, then I'll be a PhD candidate and I'll be able to do my dissertation.
Wow.
Oh,
Unbelievable.
congratulations.
It's
That's a
so,
really big step. That's so good. I'm so proud of you. It's
yeah,
Yeah,
huge.
thank you.
we are.
So, So, Nick, I was thinking back, and I think that you and I may have known each other about maybe 7 years or something so far. Does that sound about right?
Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I found your like videos on Arctic methane before I met you met you. But yeah. So yeah, it's been several years now already.
So, during that time period, and you've gone through a lot of changes yourself, you've made a
Oh,
big
yeah.
move, you've gotten into this PhD program, your wife and child is up there as well. How has your perspective changed through that time? Because I know that you were always kind of, well, a doomer, right? I guess we're all doomers, right?
Yeah.
But has it changed through your studies that you've done in the university,
Well,
or is it the
I
same?
I guess I guess my view is that you know much of I mean some of the doomish perspective comes from the physics of it, the science, the physics, and some of it
Right.
comes from comes from the politics. So the political issues that's and social issues that stymie our ability to try to do what we can to keep the climate change from becoming so devastating. And then also the science is increasingly heavily against us being able to do anything either. So, but coming to doing emergency management has always been a perspective of mine, and I've been interested in emergency management since Hurricane Katrina, almost 20 years ago
Mm.
now.
Hmm.
Um,
God.
my interest in EM has been to try to do what we do the best that we can to help others and to the best of our ability, no matter the circumstances. There's lots of ways that we can prepare for disasters, respond to them, recover from them, and try to reduce long term risks through mitigation measures. And and it's just a lot of times people, societies, governments struggle with the decisions and the resources to do all of those things. There's a lot that goes in, a lot to unpack when you learn about how to mitigate against disasters. And you're dealing with not only can people do it, will people do it, are people willing to put the money down to be willing to do something now that costs a lot less than the cost of the disaster later on. There's a it's challenging. So I mean, my perspective, I guess, is maybe slightly less doomish than I used to be, just because I'm focusing more on doing what's trying to spur society to do what's possible to reduce our vulnerabilities, and try to do what we can. But at the same time, I've always had it in the back of my head that the biggest things that are stymieing us are the physics and the politics.
The
um,
politics.
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, because I mean, we have all of these. We have the was it the Kyoto Agreement? We have these other agreements and accords on climate and hazard risk reduction, um, so the Sendai framework and things like that. But um, you know, there's a lot of talk about doing things to reduce and try to reduce the risks associated with global warming and climate change. But at the end of the day, and I mean, not to say that some governments aren't doing a lot more than others, but obviously the United States and a lot of the industrialized nations, it's still a struggle to get them to do what needs to be done
Mhm.
drastic changes to give us a better chance to avert some of the absolute worst impacts. and it's frustrating to watch because every day it gets a little bit worse. I mean, every day you're adding more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, you're adding more heat into the lower atmosphere. I mean, the oceans are getting hotter. The Arctic and Antarctic ice or sea ice are melting. The land ice is melting faster, and every day that is something things aren't drastically changed is the worst the outcome is going to be for humanity and for the environment, the natural world. So, yeah, I mean it. So, I mean, my perspective has kind of changed somewhat, but not dramatically, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's a question here from astrologer Climate Witness. We love her so much. What exactly does Nick think the best path if we are going to do something? What does he think would be the best path, at least to try? Do you have an answer for that one? Or,
I mean, the best path is probably to do everything possible to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as possible, as effectively as possible, and stop tearing down and burning our forests for agriculture and other things, and basically it's coming down to respecting the natural world, and we're not really doing that. I mean, the heavily industrialized countries, their populations aren't growing as fast, but they're using more and more resources at the expense of less developed countries, and it's basically devouring the planet, so planet's resources.
mhm,
So you have to really tackle that in order to be able to have a chance with climate change, whatever chance that is. But um,
mhm,
yeah, that's
mhm,
a lot of it. I mean, and it's interesting in emergency management. There's increasingly more emergency management scholars interested in vulnerability and social justice issues because they see this this intersection between, well, there's this idea of reducing long term risk to people, but a lot of that comes through helping people in routine times, having less poverty, having more equitable government and more equitable societies, and and basically treating people better. Of all things,
mhm.
You
you treat them
think?
better and
Yeah.
give them better and higher and better, standards of living, and you reduce their risk related to disasters, and I mean, I talk about that, and but I also just talked about the fact that we have all these resources being used, but a lot of them is by the richest of the rich that use a ton of
Mhm,
resources at the expense of the very poor, and so the very poor never have an opportunity to even have a decent standard of living and decent housing to protect them from hazard events because the very wealthy take all the resources for themselves and use it extravagantly. So, I mean, you have a lot of issues where people are starting to see this intersection between emergency management and vulnerability and social justice issues. So it's something that's been coming up more in recent decade or two with emergency management, as it's sort of trying to understand its identity as a discipline, and things like that. So I mean, yeah, there's a lot out there that can be done that's just not getting done to to reduce risk and
Suffering.
help save
mhm.
Yeah.
the planet, I guess. But I
Wow.
don't know about saving the planet, but at least keeping it from burning
And reducing
Oh, yeah.
suffering.
and
You
reducing
know,
suffering. Right? Yeah.
I have a question. This pops up all the time when you talk about inequities or people talk about inequities and they say, well, if everyone had the opportunity for growth or being equitable, wouldn't that exacerbate the planet's problems even more? And I don't know. I don't like that argument. What do you think?
Well, it, if you had everybody being rich, I suppose that would be a problem. Everybody taking huge amounts of resources like the very rich do, then yeah,
Right.
you'd have an acceleration of destruction. But if you're talking about having less billionaires and
Yeah.
more equitable spread
Yeah.
of resources, I'm not. I don't know. I'm not. I'm. It's getting into politics, but the politics that we have on the planet right now is 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 tied to economic systems that are
Shitty.
causing destructive problems in society. That's just the way it is. I mean, capitalism is a weird system because it does breed some forms of innovation. People are able to think for themselves and decide for themselves what they want to do,
Yeah.
versus other systems that are far more authoritarian. But at the same time, it's a double-edged sword because you can have predatory capitalism where you have the few that get very rich off the backs of very poor people, and it ends up causing greater problems. So um, and greater destruction. So it causes greater environmental damage, and then it also causes social problems by having this huge disparity in wealth and
True.
political problems too, because who controls the politics? It's the wealthy that can pay the politicians off either directly,
Yes.
in a corruptive way, or even just through their political campaigns in a legal way, and what's considered legal. So,
I
um,
think that these people deserve the flush.
and,
The rich billionaire capitalist people that are piggies. Let's flush them away. First flush of the night. We might
yeah,
have
we
more.
figured.
Indeed.
Yeah, we
Indeed. And
have
there's
more.
no shortage of people either. Humpty Dumpty Tribe says that every day we are adding 270,000 clueless fucking morons to the planet. So that's like a
Ay,
quarter of a million people, more than that, per day. And that is just shocking. When do you
per
think that
day.
all these things are just going to kind of collide together? It just sounds so hopeless. I don't think that my view has gotten any more hopeful over the past many years. I think I've stayed steadily in the doomosphere. So, what do you think about this population, this exponential population growth that we are engaged in? If you look at a graph, it's going like straight up, you know? How can
Yeah,
that segue in?
it depends on. Um, I mean, as far as like, global population obviously is continuing to increase, but it can there's different pressures in different places. So in a lot of poorer countries, people tend to have lots of children because they either don't have access to birth control, regardless of whether they want it or not. They don't have access to it, um, or in many cases, they have lots of children because um, of culture, religion, dictates it. The culture scape sort of dictates that you're supposed to have lots of children. Um, and then there's other issues such as economics. You have high mortality rates in some countries in birth, um, and so infant mortality. So people have lots of children because it's their retirement and insurance policy. They get older. Who's going to take care of them? It's going to be their kids, and they hope to have kids that are successful and either take over the farm or be
Yeah.
successful in some other way, and you know, have six, have maybe 12 kids, maybe you have eight or six or eight of them survive, and that's your insurance policy. I mean, it used to be like that in the United States. I mean, my grandmother is from a family of 11 other siblings.
Oof.
Most of them have passed now because she's in her 80s, and she was the youngest, one of the youngest of the kids. But yeah, I mean, you have situations where people are making decisions that seem rational in their minds because of either culture or religion tells them, or it's just an economic choice. You're just supposed to have lots of kids because you might not have them all survive, and you need to have a family that is economically, financially sustainable, and that means having lots of kids, which is kind of ironic because it can be more expensive to have kids, but it's particularly more expensive maybe in the U.S. context where everything is much more expensive. The cost of living is much more expensive than
Mm.
say in a poorer country. So it's a weird phenomenon. Um, but yeah, I mean, adding more and more people to the planet means more and more resources. But again,
And
get
more
expended.
disaster management.
Yeah, but
Really.
but again, who's hoarding all the resources? A lot of the very wealthy
Yeah, oh
are
yeah.
hoarding a lot of resources that could be used to
Totally.
feed people, as well as destroying the
Totally.
environment in the process. So, you know,
Mm.
Um, Nick, I wanted to segue, and I hope you're okay with this, Jennifer. We
Oh
segue
yeah.
into what's
Okay.
been going on in Canada and the fires and the reasons why, and your meteorological brain and the smoke and the misery. Yes, and
yeah,
I did have a little I do have something that I have to show that without humor, folks, where would we be?
Mm. Mm.
very true.
Thought that was a good way to start. All right, Nick. So tell
Absolutely.
us what's going on.
Yeah, so it's been unusually, at least by Canadian standards, hot and certainly dry, and that's really the quick and easy way of describing it. There's been, a strong high pressure that's just sat over the northern tier states of the U.S. and into Canada, and it's been a lot of that type of weather, and it's driven abnormal warmth and dryness over much of the country of Canada, and it's driving a lot of the fires that we're seeing. There's fires in Western Canada too, but the ones in the east have been maybe, at least in terms of like perception, maybe unusually intense, because usually you think of the Western U.S. and the Rockies and the Cascades as being the place where you can get big fires in California and the U.S. And but I mean, the east coast of Canada is Quebec have been dealing with some nasty fires, and all that smoke was wrapping around a low pressure system that was centered over, I believe it was over Newfoundland, and it's caused all that smoke to spread into the northeast U.S., especially in the past several days, and that's what's been causing all of this historic smoke in parts of New York State and New Jersey and
Oh,
Pennsylvania,
yes.
all the way south into Virginia and D.C. and yeah, I mean it's been bad. I mean we we actually had here in Fargo a couple weeks ago. The pattern was a little different with the airflow patterns, and we had some smoke from eastern Canada spread over North Dakota, and it was very smoky, and you could smell the smoke. I woke up one morning and went outside to take my son to school, and it smelled like nasty campfire. It was awful. I mean,
Mm.
so I mean, it wasn't as bad as New York the other day, though. I
Oh, it
mean, New
was
York, that
insane.
was, I
It
mean,
was
that looked like
insane here.
Mars. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't even see the mountains across the street. New York was really affected, and people were not prepared. We were not ready.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't really. It's kind of one of those events that you don't really think about as a potential disaster, but I mean, people can die from smoke inhalation like that, where you can get really sick. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there was increased, ER visits that day
Oh, there
because of all
were.
that smoke. Oh
There
yeah.
were. It was. I saw it. There were children, old people, all over New York State.
Mm.
And, people might make fun of masks, but there was a function because the particulate matter in these wildfires, it's not like just running inside and smoking a bong. You know what's in your bong.
Yeah.
This was horrible stuff, and you could smell
Yeah.
it. And it's not just the same as the being a wood stove. This is carcinogens and carbon monoxide, and I mean
Yeah.
Mhm.
the whole plethora.
Yeah.
So I gardened with it
I
on, and
mean,
I
you.
was not upset.
Yeah, I mean, you need a good N95 or KN95 mask for that day because I mean that was bad.
N95. Yeah, the
Mm.
Yeah,
particulates are
N95.
tiny, tiny, tiny.
Yeah, yeah,
Ay, ay,
Mm.
ay.
Mm. Mm.
yeah. So I
So,
mean,
do
it's
they have
I
any
mean the fires.
estimates of?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I mean,
Oh, I was going to say, like, this occurs to me, like, all this smoke and all this particulate matter, if any of this goes north, it's going to settle on the Arctic sea ice, right? It's going to affect the quickness of how quickly that Arctic sea ice is going to go down. Plus, we're in El Nino pretty much now at this point, and there's going to be
hmm
more influxes of hot water into the Arctic. So, I want to just kind of take a look at that and see if you have any estimates about when you think that we're going to have our first blue ocean event in the Arctic, given all that stuff.
oh, yeah, that's pretty hard to predict just because of the because when it comes to the Arctic sea ice, it's like the 2012 event, which wasn't blue ocean, but it got definitely got a step closer to it with the destruction of the ice up there in 2012. It was thin ice that gotten much thinner compared to earlier decades, and then much of it was destroyed by a single storm or series of storms went through and destroyed the ice up there. So I mean, you could have the first event could be an extreme event where you get just a intersection of different things occurring all at once. You might have some boreal forest on fire and you get a bunch of smoke and particulate matter, dark matter, particulate matter that goes up into the Arctic and accelerates some of the sea ice melt. You might start to get a series of storms that go and blow through and destroy a bunch of ice in middle August or early September, and then you might um, and then you might get something else like a abnormally warm Arctic already because of El Nino. So you might get a collision of different things that come together that then cause an event like that, and it could be something that happens in one season, then the next season maybe it doesn't happen, and then the next season after that it doesn't happen, but then the next season you get another collision of events and it happens again, and then after a while, after a period of several years, it starts happening every year all the time, where you get the open ocean, and probably by August or September, late August into September, you get this effectively open ocean. One, I think it's a million cubic or square kilometers of ice or less is what they consider effectively ice free. Um,
Mhm.
so, um, so I mean that when that happens is just it's hard to say. I mean, it's easier to say when it might start to happen frequently or every season, and the scientists are making those kind of predictions right now. But they keep pushing, they keep advancing it closer to the present. So it used to be like the 2040s. They talked about an effectively um, ice-free Arctic in September, and now they've pushed it to like the 2030s, or by 2030 we may see something like that happen. I saw a story recently about that actually. Some report came out suggesting that by the early 2030s we may start to finally see these blue ocean events happening. But of course, when they happen all the time, every season, it's because it's happened. It's probably already happened once in a few years earlier than that. So it could be next year, it could be this year, next year, the year after that. You see
Hmm.
it, and then maybe you go a few years and it's a slightly cooler than normal. Whatever normal is now in the Arctic, and so you don't see it. And then by 2030s, you start seeing it every season, and the Arctic completely changes because of that. I mean, you'll see, um, heating of not only the Arctic Ocean but of the land masses that surround the Arctic Ocean, in Siberia and Alaska
Hmm.
and northern Canada. Um, and you'll see accelerated melting of the permafrost because of that. So I mean, there's a lot, and of the Greenland ice sheet. So you'll see a lot of changes, altered changes that come because of that. And I don't know if the climate science really truly understands, and I don't profess to understand it either. If they don't understand it, I certainly don't understand it. The potential abrupt changes that could occur because of that loss of that sea ice, and having this wide open ocean over an expanse of the Arctic Ocean in September in the Arctic, and also it would affect the freezing season because you warm the ocean so much, and then it takes forever for it to refreeze in November, December, January. So, which accelerates it to potentially melt faster the following year. So it's this cascade of events that I don't know if we fully grasp and understand
No.
what could happen, but we'll see it when it happens. We'll get the chance to see it, and unfortunately, we won't be able to do anything about it. I mean, the ice-free Arctic. That's inevitable. I mean, you don't need warming of 2C, 3C, 4C to see an ice-free Arctic. I mean, you're going to see that pretty much in the next 5 to 10 years probably. See that event unfold, but um, it's just when it happens is hard to say. I mean, the trends right now this year, it doesn't look like it's something that it's going to happen this year. But again, it could just take a very unusually stormy August and early September to do something devastating to the sea ice up there. So we just don't know.
Jennifer, you're muted.
Oh, oh yeah, you went mute.
Sorry. And
Oh,
of
you're good.
course, with the melting of the Arctic sea ice, methane is a really big concern, right? Like the Arctic methane that's all frozen in the hydrate state up there. So, do you think that that's something that we should worry about? Or do you think that that's not really going to tip the scale any certain way, that it's not, the methane emissions will or will not really tip the scale from a heat perspective? What's your opinion on that?
I've heard a lot of arguments about it amongst the scientists over whether the Arctic Ocean is deep enough that it absorbs the methane or before it reaches the atmosphere. In other words, is it so shallow that the hydrates destabilizing the methane can go directly into the atmosphere, or not? And I mean, I don't know. I wish they would do more research into it, honestly, because it sounds. I
You
mean,
can't get the
from it,
Russian research anymore. And that was
yeah,
big. Those
Mhm.
yeah,
collaborations were huge with Russian scientists.
Mhm.
This is the a
yeah,
Yeah.
tragedy that people don't talk about of this stupid war.
yeah,
That. How
yeah.
about how about the effects of the thinning ice, the blue ocean event, or we know it's not just one event, it's going to happen, but the what happens to the rest of the world. We've talked about this on our show many, many times, but update us, Nick, on what you've learned, what you think.
Well, I mean, and I know Paul Beckwith talked about this some years ago too. The the issue with one of the um, potential climate tipping points that you could have with the sufficient loss of sea ice is that not only would you have um, greater warming of the landmass, the coastal landmass surrounding the Arctic Ocean, you could also have changes in the jet stream where say the polar vortex, the lower atmosphere polar vortex, anyways, shifts more towards the Greenland and enhances the polar jet stream over the Atlantic, which could cause bigger storms that could impact the British Isles, Western Europe, or intensify storms off the northeast U.S. and things like that. And I know, um, and and I know James Hansen has talked about the fact that more abrupt warming and melting of sea ice, or not sea ice, land ice from Greenland, cools the ocean south of Greenland and creates a greater temperature contrast between the warm, temperate Atlantic and that cold pool south of Greenland, which can enhance the temperature contrast in the atmosphere and enhance the jet stream and produce really big storms that way too. So you could have all sorts of weird phenomenon occur because of the loss of sea ice in the Arctic. And I know other scientists have discussed this issue of the loss of sea ice leading to a destabilization of the jet stream, which the bigger waves in the jet stream. I mean, Jennifer Francis has talked about it, and others have talked about it. I think even Michael Mann and Stefan Ramsdorf out of Germany have talked about this potential destabilization of the
Oh
jet stream
boy.
from sea ice. Um, yeah, so I mean, you could have all sorts of weird things going on because of the loss of sea ice. I mean, sea ice is like, I mean, in terms of geographic scope, it's a huge area that it covers during the course of the year. Even in the loss of the sea ice in the summer, it still covers a huge area of sea that's highly reflective, and you lose that reflectivity, and it can cause havoc on the rest of the climate. And and it's very it's such a huge area that changes over the course of a year, but it can change very abruptly if you get some other climate mechanism that destabilizes it further, like dark particulate matter, like bigger storms, like um, um, overall hotter oceans and planet from say El Nino situation, something like that. You can get this destabilization of the sea ice sheet over the Arctic Ocean, and that can cause a lot of other problems in the climate. So, um, yeah.
No, not a lot of good news, Nick. Um, do you have any? Do you have hope? Do you have hope in any part of you that we may be able, or where would your hope reside? What keeps you going, knowing everything that you do?
Well, I mean, it's weird because like when you're an emergency management disaster science person, you kind of ultimately always have some sort of hope in your mind that things can be done in such a way to either avert disaster or reduce the harms associated with it. And so, um, I guess I picked this field because I wanted to contribute to actually doing something about harms to people and the environment. And so, um, you know, I just think that um, there's there's a lot that can still be done for humanity to be able to live on this planet as long as possible. I mean, humans, whether it's 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, or thousands of years from now, we're gonna go extinct at some point because no species lasts forever. It's just whether we're gonna go because of our of of natural progression or artificial stupidity. you know, the
Artificial
stupidity
stupidity.
that we're causing all this problems on this planet for no good reason except there's too many of us and a lot of hoarding of resources and destruction of the environment that's killing us, or will or
Hmm.
could kill us, or would kill us. Um, so I mean, I've spent a lot of my time and effort, here, and I mean that's why I wanted to be a meteorologist too. I wanted to be in some way a service to people and help people in some way, and I'm doing so still as an emergency management disaster scientist. So I mean, there's, the alternative is for me would be just to sit around and do nothing, and I don't really like that idea at all. I
Yeah.
mean, we're all, I
None
mean,
of
we're
us
all,
here are
I
like
mean, we're
that.
all, we're all here doing something. I mean, for some people it might be lifestyle change. For other people, it might be just being informative and informing people what's going on. For
Mhm.
others, like me, it's being a scientist. So it's all something. It's all of value to society in some way. But that's I guess the hope that I have is to just be of service to society in some way.
That's beautiful.
It is really commendable, actually. I'm very happy. Good for you.
Well, I think we're getting to the question portion of the show. And we have one from Volt Revolt, and that is we just had a triple dip La Nina. Can an El Nino last for 3 years or for an extended period? Good question, Volt Revolt.
Hmm.
Yeah, you can have El Ninos multiple years in a row. I mean, I think the last big one was in 2014, 15, and 16. We had multiple years in the El Nino situation. Um, like I mean, we had the warmest year on record for the Earth, 2016. We had major declines in Arctic sea ice because of all that heating of the planet and the oceans. You had the most intense hurricane ever recorded, one in the Western Hemisphere, and one of the most powerful ever recorded on Earth, which was Hurricane Patricia in the Pacific, because the
Hmm.
oceans were so hot that had maximum sustained winds of 215 miles per hour.
Oof.
That was
That's
ridiculous.
crazy.
Yeah, that's a true superstorm. So I mean, you had I think you had historic fires and smoke from Indonesia, I think, during that period because of drought related to El Nino. So, I mean, you can have multiple years of El Nino, and it happened in the 90s too, like in 90, I think 91 to 94, there was um, multiple El Nino years. So, yeah, you can definitely have multiple years with El Nino. It's hard to say what's going to happen with this particular El Nino. Um,
Bila
it's
thinks
supposed
it's going to be permanent. I don't know. Oh boy.
uh, Probably not, but I mean it'll drive up global average temperatures. That's for sure. I mean
Yeah.
that's going to happen. The risk of us reaching a record year for warmth on the for heating on the planet is pretty significant in the next 5 years, and and certainly getting into 1.5, 1.6 C global average temperature and all that. They're talking about that being a potentially hitting that in a single year. So I mean, it's yeah. I mean, the planet's going to probably see some pretty ridiculous extremes, and I mean, we've already seen some ridiculous extremes already in the past, just the past couple of years with the heat wave in the Pacific Northwest and
Mm-hmm.
the fires in Canada and Russia and the boreal forests, and so I mean,
So
there's a lot still to come, unfortunately.
Okay. Uh,
there,
Jen,
there's Sandy. There's a question from David McCraig, and
I
he
got it.
says, "I'm wondering." You got it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what scares Nicholas the most when it comes to what is happening in our climate. Do you have Do you have that? You have a top fear? What do you think's gonna melt down first?
Um, top what scares me the most. I think well, I mean, it's the most it's the easiest thing to deal to track with climate change with global warming. It's the heat. I think that's what scares me the most. Is the heat.
Mm.
'Cause, I mean, what happened in say the Pacific Northwest um, in a couple years ago, a couple summers ago now. I mean, that was. I mean, I grew up in Seattle. I was born and raised in Seattle. Grew up there. I lived in Washington State until 2008. I mean, I experienced some beginnings of some of those extremes, but I mean the extreme temperatures that occurred there and the fire that erupted in that town in British Columbia after they had that historic heat, and I mean that was truly terrifying. Even though I wasn't there to experience it, it was terrifying to watch that climate be completely altered by this single extreme event. And I mean, you could easily see, and I think hundreds of people died from the heat in that area. So I mean, you
Mm.
could easily see those kind of any part of the world could see those extreme temperatures, and if there happens to be a place like the Midwest where the food is grown, or another part of the world where there's a lot of humidity, then you could have thousands of people dying all at once
Mm.
from the heat. So I mean, the heat is killer to humans. The heat can be killer to other wildlife that aren't accustomed to the heat. It can be killer to um, plants, that can't stand the heat. It just gets too hot for them relative to the climatic conditions that they're used to. Um, it's the heat. I mean, once you start getting into 1.5 C, 2 C global average temperature, and beyond that, and really the the land air temperatures are accelerating faster than the ocean temperatures. Although the ocean temperatures are rising pretty extreme too, but the land air temperatures are really climbing, and there's going to be just a lot of heat that starts killing people, animals, and crops.
Mm. There's a good question from Rollin Switch, Sandy. Nicholas, are there enough emergency resources to deal with increasing emergencies, or do we need political change to allot more funding and training?
Um, well, it's kind of weird because like in the U.S. Uh, the government is very decentralized. So, I mean, in any society, a general principle of like emergency management, disaster response is that the locals handle it first because they're closest to the disaster, so they automatically get involved and handle the event first because they're physically closer to it. It's within their jurisdiction. Um, but in the United States, it's very decentralized in general because of local supremacy, over a lot of things. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of lack of standardization of how to do things. There's resource allocation is an issue, and then the training is an issue too. Like a lot of emergency managers in, say, particularly in the rural United States, if we're just talking about the United States, are like former fire department people or police people. They're very um, um, used to like emergency response, and they don't really understand what how to prepare for a disaster. Emergency management, emergency is a specific term. Emergency is something like a car accident or a house fire or something like that that is handled by very few agencies in one jurisdiction, whereas a disaster is involves a lot of different organizations. Nonprofits get involved, a lot of government agencies, different layers of government get involved, and there's a lot of messiness that goes into dealing with disaster. And you don't really have people that are trained, emergency managers that are trained to understand the entire wheel of the emergency management cycle and how to deal with different organizations, agencies, where to find resources, how to best garner those
Yeah.
and utilize those resources, who can potentially be involved. And so there's a lot of issues with training. And I mean, um, there's been a lot more in recent couple decades, a lot of more emergency management disaster programs and higher education that have come up and risen up. But a lot of them are very different. So some of them might focus just on disaster response, but they don't talk about recovery, how to actually deal with disaster recovery, and working with, say, a lot of nonprofits deal with disaster recovery, like the Red Cross and local organizations, community organizations that deal with recovery after, say, a hurricane. They don't know how to work with those people because they don't really understand what recovery is from a theoretical standpoint, a practical standpoint, and they may not understand mitigation issues or where to get funding for mitigation and from the government and things like that. So there's a lot of training issues and education issues that are out there in terms of like be able to get the education and training required to be able to be a holistic emergency manager that understands all of these facets of disasters and dealing with disasters. So yeah, I mean it's an issue in the United States at least.
Oh. Well, here's another issue. Billy Joe Smo said that the Amazon is no longer an oxygen producer, it's a CO2 producer. Have you also seen that the Amazon is now no longer a carbon sink, it's a carbon source?
Well, I've heard
Is it?
I've heard it. Just I think with all of us have heard that it's increasingly becoming a um, less of an oxygen producer and more of a carbon producer because it's just burning more. I mean, some of the burning is from drought and fire and recurring drought and fires that are getting worse in the Amazon, and some of it is from the growth of agriculture and maybe and maybe practices of logging that they shouldn't be doing in the Amazon. And um, I know, I know. I think Bolsonaro lost his election, so there's somebody new in Brazil, but I don't
Lula.
know. Yeah, I don't know
Lula.
what their policies are on the Amazon.
There's a
Yeah, so
bit of a. We were all excited, but there's trouble in paradise. Put it that way.
Oh,
no, yeah,
Yeah. All right. Let's
yeah.
see what.
I mean that's something to consider because again, the politics and the physics are both playing against the Amazon improving itself and regrowing itself, and as the planet warms and humans don't do what they need to do to preserve what they can in the Amazon and other rainforests around the world.
Well, we want to make our products with palm oil, and they want to raise. They want to raise cattle. Okay, we have a question from Karen, our longtime follower, Karen Reese. Is legacy carbon buried in old growth forests? Just heard this description today, and I think I know what Karen was looking at.
Hmm.
Legacy carbon in old growth forests. Is it buried? So does
I
that mean
actually
like
don't know a lot about.
okay.
Yeah, I actually don't know a lot about old growth forests. I mean, the old growth forests obviously have a lot of or well, they're old and they have a lot of carbon storage, I think, but I don't actually know a lot about them except that hopefully they're not on fire
Yeah, wouldn't you
like
think
the
if they
rainforest.
burn, then they let out
Yeah,
all of that legacy carbon in that
yeah,
they've been holding for millennia? Wow.
yeah.
All right, let's see. Roland Switch has another question. Will most major roads just jam up during evacuations? That's an interesting question. You're going to be
Hmm.
in
Oh, yeah,
managing these disasters. So, what about
yeah.
the people
Evacuations.
driving?
Yeah, evacuations are interesting. Um, so ideally, the way emergency manager would want things to happen is that they set up evacuation zones. So let's say a hurricane approaches, right? Um, they know based on the weather forecasts where the impacts are going to be, and so they tell people in particular zones to evacuate to escape the hazard, right? The hazard for evacuation, most evacuation zones, the hazard is dealing with the water, dealing with um, um, storm surge, right?
Hmm.
So um, the thing is that when you tell a jurisdiction to evacuate, even if you tell them the zones and tell them where to be, some people will outside of the evacuation zones will evacuate too, and this is called shadow evacuation. So they evacuate even though they were told not to. And this can cause problems where people jam up the roads, right? Because, um, um, and this and many times they're doing this rationally, even though they were told not to evacuate. They evacuate either because they're worried about the water, even though they're not forecast to be in an area where the water will be bad, or they're worried about the wind because they're afraid that the wind damage will be so bad that they will have wished to have left, so they leave anyways, even though they're told not to leave because they're not in the threat for the water. They're leaving because of the wind.
Right.
So this happens. So yeah, shadow evacuations happen, and you can have people jam up the road. So the best that emergency managers can do usually is try to emphasize with people, explain to people, don't not explain to people that they understand the threat posed by other hazards other than the water, but the primary threat is the water. And if you're not in the evacuation zone, um, don't evacuate because they give people a chance that are in the zones to leave first. And
Yeah,
then if the threat
makes
changes,
sense.
then please do leave when we ask you to. So, but yeah, shadow evacuations happen, and so roads can get jammed up, and they usually in the southern U.S. do things like contraflow, where they'll open up all the roads, and have people go
Hmm.
in both directions, go in one direction.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so
Makes
yeah, so
sense.
it's very common to try to um, try to acknowledge the extra people that are on the roads, to have both roads be open in one direction. So yeah.
All right. Well, let's see. I do have two comments. I want to bring Poppy, our also longtime very good friend, Poppy Davis. Well, Nick, I guess you're just cleaning up after the catastrophic events happen. Well, is that kind of what disaster management, or you're managing through these catastrophic events?
Managing through them. I mean, preparing for them. So having a state of readiness to respond, recover, and mitigate. Actually responding to the events,
Hmm.
and then recovering from them and hopefully being able to reduce risk by mitigating against them. Mitigation being like building dams, levees, moving people away from hazardous areas, things like that. So that's sort of the holistic. You call it comprehensive emergency management. It's sort of the holistic approach. Whether emergency managers in reality do that um, is another thing, but that's sort of the goal, the idealistic goal in emergency management is to do comprehensive emergency management.
All right. Let's
Yeah,
see.
and
I
Jen?
had
actually,
one here.
actually,
Yep. Okay, Jen.
yeah.
Where
Sorry.
is it?
So it's right.
Uh,
It's David McCraig again. He's got some good questions. We have a few towns in British Columbia that are totally cut off by fire because the only highway out has been closed due to the fire. People are beginning to panic. And to segue onto that, add on to that, I saw some video footage, and maybe you guys did too, of the fires up in Canada from dash cams. And there are fires, like a wall of fire on each side. And then the traffic stops because everybody's trying to get out. And they're freaking out in this dash cam
Yeah.
footage. And
Yeah.
everybody's like saying, oh my God, because they can't get out. Their car is stuck and the fire's on both sides. It's
Oh my
truly
God.
scary.
yeah, I mean, and someone actually mentioned one of the fires, that fire in from several years ago in California that killed a bunch of people, like dozens of people. A comment
Paradise.
too. Yeah, I
Is that
think it was Paradise,
Yes,
maybe.
paradise. I don't even think it's a
Yeah,
town
and that was
anymore.
yeah, and that was an issue too with the roads. And the thing is that um, this is kind of a mitigation issue. Part of reducing risk is to give people the ability to get away and remove themselves from the hazard and improve, and then in doing so can improve response to a hazard event. And so, but who wants to spend the money on bigger roads that can hold greater volumes of cars for an event that might happen once or twice in the history of the town? For who wants to spend the money on that? That's the issue in mitigation all the time. Why do we want to build this seawall? Why should we build this seawall? Why
Yeah.
should we build these extra roads? Why should we do this? And it's like it costs literally cents on the dollar compared to a disaster. But a lot of people have trouble conceptualizing an event as that could happen to them or to the community that just hasn't happened before, and so I mean mitigation is a really rough issue. This happened in the Galveston, Texas, before the hurricane in Galveston in 1900. In the late, I think it was the late 1880s, some of the wealthy people in Galveston, like the upper middle class and wealthy in
Hmm.
Galveston, actually were talking about building a seawall and trying to get the legislature in Texas to help fund a seawall. But I think it went slowly, and eventually the initial push kind of slowed down, and it just never got done. And so, no, there was no seawall in Galveston prior to the hurricane of
Mhm.
1900. That would have been a major mitigation strategy that would have reduced the devastating, like tsunami like impact that hurricane, a Category 4 hurricane, had on Galveston Island. Um, Galveston still exists today after,
Yep.
say, Hurricane Ike several years ago or a decade ago. You had Hurricane Ike, and you had some major flooding in Galveston, but it wasn't so devastating that the community couldn't return back to some sense of normalcy afterwards. Um, whereas Galveston was destroyed and devastated for quite a few years, it took to return. And so, I mean, that mitigation matters, and a lot of times, unfortunately, it takes a big event to spur change that perception of risk in people to then do something in the recovery effort to produce mitigation for the future events. But you have to have that big event happen first, and it has to happen to that community, not like some nearby community, like or something. It has to happen to them, and so they really experience it and feel it, and then say, okay, this can happen. This is part of our history now. We need to help try to prevent this from happening again. It's hard to get people to think before the first event happens in the history of the community that could really devastate the community, and like building dams, like building levees, like building flood walls, sea walls, bigger roads to handle more cars and from a mountain community. It just for fire. So
You
yeah.
think there's no other way? Because I know that Poppy was saying, Nick, you're advocating for bigger roads and bigger seawalls. It's limited thinking, but it's helping people. So is there an answer that's not about more growth I mean, what is the answer there to what she's saying?
Well, some of the stuff I'm mentioning is more structural in nature, but there's also just retreating away from high risk areas. There's no area that's zero risk. There's always
Right.
something. If there's a flood, you move somewhere else. There's a tornado, you move somewhere else. There's lahars. There's,
Yeah,
there's
like
always
she said.
something. But yeah, you can have relocation. We have that in Fargo even where they bought out. They offered buyouts from the Red River
Mhm.
to reduce the population right along the Red River. And there's one area of Fargo where like literally there's one house because there was one owner that just said no, I'm not going to move, and so they stayed. But the rest of it is like levee, you
Oh
know,
my god.
so or wall, and there's like flood walls and stuff near the river. I'm relatively close to the river actually, but I'm away from the flood area. Um, but yeah, there's obviously ways you can do um, that involve the people side to reduce the risk somewhat to people by just moving them away from those areas and offering them a buyout or
It's gonna
or
have to
or
happen.
um, or some of this is happening just within the marketplace too. It's not just the government buying out people
Yeah.
or property. It's insurance rates going
Hmm.
skyrocketing. Say California or in Florida, where people it's becoming not affordable to live in certain areas because they can't afford the insurance, and it's not worth the risk to not have insurance. So they move somewhere else. So the market, there's capitalism maybe doing something somewhat positive. Perhaps it's forcing people to have to decide, okay, do I stay or do I go? It ain't worth staying because I can't
Do
even
I
get a good
stay or
insurance rate here because it's
right?
not affordable. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. And
But
and there's a actually a comment from Serenity along that inability to get home insurance will be the deciding factor. I
Yeah,
agree. I
yeah,
agree.
yeah.
oh, I didn't see it. Okay, yeah. I know
There's some
I
funny. I'm
totally missed
laughing
it.
not because
Oh
what we're
no,
talking about is funny,
because
but some of the comments are very
we
funny.
have a very humorous chat because they
Right.
appreciate the fact that humor is okay to deal with all of this stressful
Yeah.
shit. All right, Jennifer Lopez. Some of the most interesting emergency management work is coming from technical large animal emergency rescue folks. TLAER, working with some very unusual and difficult environmental circumstances. And I've seen it because I donate to the Ukrainian Fund for Animals. And I donate, little tiny bits, but to the SPCA and to the, Humane Society. And I've seen the videos of what they do in emergency management for animals. Have you thought about any of that, Nicholas?
No, I haven't heard of that before, but it sounds pretty interesting. Yeah.
Well, maybe it'll be something that'll come up in your study.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Let me see. Oh, we have a couple. Well, here's Rollins. What you got? Nick, do you see New Orleans as viable in the future
Um, well, I mean, if we're talking,
to live there?
if we're talking like 100, 200 years from now, and assuming humanity will still be like
Oh,
civilized in 100, 200 years without
even here.
climate change getting out of control, then the answer is probably not. I mean, right now they can still do the things that are required to reduce the risk to New Orleans of flooding. They just again, it took like Hurricane Katrina to to do something about some of the issues they had with um, maintaining um, maintaining the levee system of New Orleans in a way that actually deals with major events adequately. But eventually, with with sea level rise, the New Orleans is going to have a hell of a time holding back the ocean. I just don't. Yeah, I don't. I mean, especially if sea level rise accelerates dramatically, like James Hansen has suggested, possibly
Hmm.
could happen. Then yeah, no. I mean, Miami's in trouble. DC is in trouble. New York is in trouble. So I mean, but New Orleans in particular is in a whole lot of trouble,
Hmm.
both because of sea level rise and because of subsidence of the land, where the land is sinking. So just
And the
naturally,
buildings are so heavy, and Florida's
yeah,
becoming like that. They're just building these heavy buildings. I always call it the crane state. How much more can Florida take? It's
yeah.
not like it's Montana. All right, let's see here. Wendy Dalis. Wendy asks, any comments about lowering temperature in the mesopause?
Um, I've heard about it. The stratosphere and the mesosphere, I think, are getting colder. I don't know what effect that would have on surface weather, but I'm not. Um, if I were a master's and PhD in meteorology, I might have an interest in the upper atmosphere. There's a lot of scientists that study the upper atmosphere as opposed to the troposphere and tropospheric weather. But
The
I don't know.
Trumposphere.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily know a lot about it. So
Okay.
yeah.
Jennifer, did you see anything?
Well, I did. I saw one from Kevin Hester. I'd like to give a big shout
Hi,
out
Kev.
to Kev.
Let's
So, hey,
find
Kev.
it.
He
Let
says, I'll be interested to hear what
I didn't see
interactions
this.
Nick will have in his new role with insurance companies as California is already losing the option of insurance.
It's kind of what we talked about earlier. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean it's. I mean, yeah, it's going to be. I mean, that's going to be the determinant of who lives and who lives and who stays. I mean, the the I mean, the wealthiest people may stay in those places very much longer. It may be, um,
No, they're coming
but
here.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be a major determinant of who stays and who goes. And unfortunately, um, I it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves because I mean, you're going to have people losing insurance coverage or unable to afford insurance coverage, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're automatically going to move. You know, if they're poorer, they may not move, so they may stay and face the climate risk not because they want to, but because they can't move. They just don't have the affordability to move. We spend a lot. Just for my family, we spent a lot of money on credit cards to move from Lincoln, Nebraska to the Fargo, North Dakota. I mean, we didn't have any like real like income to move up here. Um, Imagine trying to move and you may not have the money or the resources to do it, and you just stay, and then a disaster happens, and you didn't have insurance, and you've lost basically everything. So
Right.
it may end up being a lot of people left behind, which that's what happens a lot, isn't it? In disasters, you have people who are poor, and the system, you could say, failed them, or maybe it worked the way it was supposed to work.
We
You know,
know Don James
and
says, well, we know what determines that, don't we, Nick? Right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it's the systems that you have in place, the political systems, social systems, economic systems. They all determine all of these um, pressures that lead to these unsafe conditions that cause vulnerability in society, and some be more vulnerable than others. So no system is perfect. It's impossible to have something that's perfect, because there's always something about it that's imperfect as a human system. But what we have now is definitely failing a lot of people, and those people will probably be left behind without insurance, without anything, and then the storms come, or whatever, the seas rise, storms come, and they lose everything. So
They're all coming to my house. Thanks, Don. Well, we have to get a few laughs, and this is serious
Yeah.
stuff. So I've got a couple of.
okay.
I have a very serious question from Early Love. Why are Homo sapiens so insane? Any thoughts? Seriously, why are they? Oh
Hmm.
my
Well,
god.
I think humans are just doing what humans are doing what all species do, which is they grow, they they feed, they have children, they grow.
Yeah,
It's just we've gotten we're smart in
we
terms of
are.
our. We're smart in terms of our ability to build things to protect us from the environment. That's why there's 8 billion of us, right?
Yeah,
We built a society, a global society of 8 billion people, because we got so good, too good at protecting ourselves from the natural environment that could kill us.
true.
We don't. I can walk down the street and I don't have to worry. If I lived in rural Minnesota, I have to worry about bears, I guess. But otherwise, in Fargo, North Dakota, I don't have to worry about bears trying to eat me, tigers trying to eat me,
Right.
lions trying to eat me. I don't have to worry about, worry about. There was this one show. This is one show on CBS called Ghosts. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's like this. This is weird show where somebody sees ghosts and stuff in in the house that they live in and stuff. It's like a comedy, but they had this one episode where they went back to um, one of the colonists, to the colonial days, and one of the colonists was like, "Yeah, three of my four nephews are alive after the winter, so it's been a good day."
Oh my god.
Oh my
You know, it's
goodness.
just like,
All right,
so
listen.
it's just like the winter doesn't have to worry about the winter killing me anymore
Oh
because I have
jeez.
heat. We've gotten really good at protecting ourselves from the natural world. That's kind of dangerous for us.
Yeah.
Could be otherwise pretty dangerous for us. Some countries much better than others. You could go to other countries where the natural world still could be potentially threatening to you, but I mean, we've gotten so good at it because we're so smart with technology and building things, and creating, and
Ruining us.
so, but the expense of that has been, we take from the natural world to do that. We take from the natural world to protect us from the natural world, protect us from disease, protect us from the cold, from the heat, and it's getting to the point where we've created so much um, byproducts from that creation. All the carbon dioxide emissions, all of the waste water, all of the nuclear, garbage and stuff like that, nuclear waste, and all of this, that it's beginning to put pressure on us, and ironically making us more vulnerable to harm, in the form of these heat disasters and natural disaster events and technological disasters
All right.
and things like that. So yeah, I mean
You've left
it's weird.
yourself wide open for Ms. Poppy. Oh boy. Nick, I appreciate what you're trying to do, help people in the interim, but hey, the big picture is we're going to collapse. Um, can you say it out loud?
Well, yeah, I mean we're gonna collapse, but I don't know where or when that's gonna happen, and it's gonna be one of those things where it's probably going to be not global because the globe is too big, but it's going to be here and then there and then here and then there, and it's going to look different in different places. What that actually means. So
Wow. Well, I did it, Pop. I did it, Pop. You guys want to go? We are an hour and 20 minutes. Jen, what do you think?
Well, I'll leave it completely up to Nick, but it's been a fabulous conversation, and thank you for sharing all of your views with us. Is there something that you'd like to sum up or say that hasn't already been said here tonight?
no, I think we covered a lot. I mean, we definitely talked about climate
Yeah.
and got to talk a lot about emergency management, which was nice
Yeah.
too, since that's my sort of expertise. But yeah, yeah, it's been good. So
Absolutely. Well, she said agree and thank you. Thank you. Um, of course, somebody I guess missed the first flush, and I don't know. Do you have another idea of what you might want to flush?
oh, I don't know. Well, you can just flush rich people again. It's an easy target.
I,
Okay, we'll just
I,
flush
I,
them.
I'd like to flush.
We'll do another one.
All right, I'd like to flush the human condition, just that place that we're at where we can't seem
Ooh.
to contend with things, and we can be very, very clever, but not very, very wise. So
Well, that
that's
Yeah.
might have to get the video flush. I think we're going to do the video. Jennifer got the executive flush. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we did pretty good with the flushes, okay? I think
yeah.
Sounds
this
good.
was a multiple flush show. Oh, multiple flushes. All right. Well, I have to say then, uh, why don't I let you bring up the rear, Jennifer, and say your closing comments,
Oh yeah. Well, I
and
mean,
I'll thank everybody.
anybody who's ever talked to me about this, I mean, I don't hold out much hope, and I think that we're headed for collapse, and I think it's
Me
going to
too.
be kind of a composite affair, and I think it's going to be kind of like getting pecked to death by a flock of rabid ducks. It's going to go pop, 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 pop,
Mm.
pop, pop all over the place. And you look around one day, and there's not much left of civilization. So that's kind of my take on it.
Lone wanderer.
I know, very, very cheery,
But
very
flush
cheery.
is wasting precious water. This is a virtual flush, baby. And I'm very attuned to water, trust me. All right. Well, everyone, it has been very interesting. I have the links to Nick's Patreon and his Facebook in the show notes. And everybody's saying thank you, Reflect the Sun and Lightning Rod and Kim. Thank you for moderating as always. Billy Joe said he smiles when he thinks billionaires are going down with us. They might live the envy the dead. All right. So, anyway, thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone,
Yeah.
for coming. We really do appreciate you guys. Have a wonderful weekend. Jennifer, I love you.
Love you too.
As always, I do. And we will say farewell. Yes, we are.